Well, good evening, Cory. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm doing good, doing good. So you retired from teaching about 2 years ago,
Yes, that's correct.
so 2020, and just before mass mandate and all that.
Yes, that is right. About 6 months to a year prior to that.
Okay, so is that about time for you to retire, or you just like
No, I started teaching in 1997. So I taught for 23 years,
mm,
and I anticipated I would continue teaching until I was a true retirement age.
right?
But I had some health problems,
Okay,
and it's hard enough to be a teacher when you feel well. It's a difficult job,
right.
but when you're fighting health problems, it was just too much for me
Yeah,
to do.
yeah. Well, so what kind of change you see over those 23 years?
Oh gosh. I saw many changes. I saw socioeconomic changes. I saw the pendulum shift with education initiatives, from anything from whole language, which basically we all said, okay, Orton Gillingham and all of those phonics-based reading programs aren't working. Let's try something new. And so they wanted to do whole language, where basically if kids sit in a classroom, they're just going to learn how to read. They're going to absorb it like little sponges.
Okay,
And I taught eighth grade, and I can tell you by the time it trickled to eighth grade, that didn't work.
right.
So that was a failed. I remember mathematics memorization suddenly became a really bad thing. So kids came to me in eighth grade, and I saw that up until my last year, where they would be moving their fingers underneath the desk because they hadn't memorized their multiplication
Right,
tables,
right.
or even simple addition facts. And so we gave them calculators. So that was a change that I saw from the beginning, where we expected them to memorize facts, to not use calculators for most of the problems. Lots more, when I first started teaching, lots more research-based academics in English class, lots more reading novels, and also writing. And I remember my English teacher that I worked with, she's a good friend of mine, going home and sitting in her chair all weekend long and writing notes out and things like that for the students to make them better writers. And that shifted to the last, I would say, 7 to 8 years, where kids could write a 3-page paper and they would get a check mark. And it would just be gibberish.
Right.
I The writing is probably one of the most significant changes I've seen. And I have a freshman, and I'm really disappointed with how little writing she does. Prior to going to public school, she's at Center Grove now. She was at a private school for gifted students, and there was rigor there. And I'm not seeing that in the public school, which is unfortunate.
No, right, yeah. And so you see the standards has lowered over those
Oh
years.
my goodness, yes. This We expect so much less academically of students. We expect less of them, less production from them too.
Right,
That was one of my biggest problems that I had with education and where I taught. Um, Students were given a due date, and if they didn't turn it in, then we were expected to let them turn it in by the end of the semester. So basically, they could have an assignment due on August 23rd, but they could turn it in on December 18th
oh wow,
and still get full credit.
right,
And I just felt like I taught ninth grade at the time, but it was across the board in education, where I taught. And it's not just my school district. I know they were doing it in other school
right,
districts.
yeah,
It's not unique to one school district. This is going on everywhere.
right. It's everywhere. It's whole country, yeah, the whole nation. I think
Yeah.
it's kind of uh is trying to accommodate for for students who are behind. I
Hmm.
mean, that intent is okay, right?
Yeah.
It's good, but the way they're doing it is by lowering the standard. So therefore, we are not challenging people who actually are capable of learning.
Right. And I think it's a huge insult to the students to say, this is as little as we expect of you. And some of my colleagues would even say, I don't assign homework because I know they're not going to do it. They're not going to turn it in. And it would then lower their grade.
Right.
And we had, I'm kind of bouncing around, but there's
That's
so many
okay. Yeah.
things that all tied together. But we had a significant amount of pressure to have a certain percent of students passing. And basically they wanted us to be at like under 10% Fs in a class.
Okay.
And that was just really unrealistic, especially when you look at the Common Core, I forget, they've changed the name so many times, but the test that students have to pass to graduate, the English and math test that they have to pass to graduate high school, that they start taking their sophomore year. And in our district, 60% of students failed it the first time, yet we are saying that we only have 8 to 10% of students failing classes. So it's completely incongruent. And that didn't sit well with me.
No.
That the teachers had so much pressure that they had to let students retake quizzes, give them half credit for turning it in, throw out the worst grade, give them a math test, a pre-test that basically was the exact same problem for problem as the test, just different numbers. So they might see number 3 is about the quadratic formula. So number 3 on the test is also going to be a quadratic formula problem.
Okay.
So we just expected so little of the kids, and in turn they gave us little because I feel like we didn't give them the courtesy of high expectations.
No. Well, there's something I feel, I'm not 100% sure on that one. I just kind of my guess is that in some ways it has a lot to do with No Child Left Behind policy.
Oh, completely. I think, I have to hope that intentions were true when they created No Child Left Behind, but what it really created was a big hot mess.
Right.
And speaking as a parent, I have a daughter who is profoundly gifted, and we started having problems with her education in 3rd grade. She was at a public school and they refused to help us. She was writing notes every day saying, can we please do algebra? And they wanted her to do basically study for the I-STEP test.
Right.
And there was a lot of frustration. And so I went to the Board of Education, and there are 2 pages basically written in law for gifted education. Special education, which is what I did. I was a special education teacher. There are 2 booklets, which I appreciate that. But again, there has to be a balance with everyone's education. We can't just teach to the bell curve. We have to provide for those outliers too. And I feel like that's something that we're really failing at. And again, speaking from a parent with a gifted child, we've really dumbed down education.
Right.
And that's how are we going to have the best and the brightest if we dumb it down and everybody has to be the same and everybody gets a trophy kind of education.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, when my son was in high school, and basically he just got bored, and there's no challenge to him. So we actually end up has to pull him out and homeschooled him.
We have talked about those options as well with our daughter. She's a freshman and we have her taking physics and chemistry and algebra, honors classes, AP, and she's still bored. She doesn't have homework ever. She never studies for tests. And so we've talked about maybe some type of an alternative education or starting college early. We're having those conversations. What could it look like for her? Because she's not being challenged like we would like to see.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, I think a lot of emphasis now in school is focused on the bottom 10%.
It is. And I think to be fair, we really have to, there needs that focus, because when I first started teaching, I heard horror stories about how special education students at the bottom, they were basically being taught in the boiler room, and that's not fair. We don't want that. I'm an advocate. I'll always be a special education advocate.
Right.
And I not only help students with special needs, but I also helped any kid who was struggling, because
Right.
they all need, I didn't differentiate, oh, you don't have an IEP, so I can't help you. I helped all the kids in the classroom that needed help.
Yeah.
But we also have to have that focus at the, at the students in the top 20% too.
Right. Mhm.
And again, I've always said, if you fall within the bell curve, you're probably going to get an okay education. You could obviously be pushed, and I don't see kids being taught at that zone of proximal development where they are challenged but not frustrated. I
Right.
don't see that. I see it as lack of challenge. Often we
Oh,
call
yeah.
it, we say that there's rigor in schools, and that's always in the motto of, if you
Right.
go
Right.
on
Right.
these townships websites, it all
Right.
has rigor.
No.
And it's a farce.
Yeah.
I don't see the rigor for most students.
Right. Well, that's where I think a lot of parents are not aware of this. Just within that 20 years, like what happened in the education in 20 years back then and education now is very different.
It is. It is very different. It got to the point, I would say 10 to 15 years ago, where sitting in your seats was a bad thing, where they wanted cooperative education. And I just remember thinking, these students know how to communicate. I taught in more of an urban setting. And so my students knew how to communicate. They didn't know how to sit in a seat, though, which is often what you have to do in some jobs. You have to be able to sit down. You kind of have to need to know those middle class hidden rules in order to function in society. Society is based on middle class norms, and sitting and being polite and having good manners, that's part of it. But they wanted cooperative education. And that's where I really started to see this group learning, and they had to sit in pods, and they would take a student, and I'm sorry to say low kid, but a student, who was really struggling, a really bright student, and two sort of middle of the road students, as they called it. And that's how they created cooperative learning. So you have the high student teaching, the middle students, they're probably learning a little bit more. And then that low student, you're trying to pick that kid up. Well, that student is struggling and probably embarrassed that there was students that are smarter than them. So they just sit there quietly. They're the one that rolls the dice, or something like that. They have a basic job, while the other kids are more engaged. And I thought, this isn't working. But they kept trying to sell me and all of the other teachers as this is the wave of the future. And that's really when I think we started dumbing down education.
Yeah, I think in the past 20 years, there are so many new things come down, and so many different new way of teaching, but it's all come down from the universities.
Yes.
It's not really based on the teachers' experience.
No, it's not. And I remember I got a very good education. However, they had us spending 45 minutes or an hour on a lesson plan, and that is unrealistic. Teachers don't have that much time to spend an hour on one lesson plan when they may have 3 or 4 classes to prepare for, or elementary teachers who have more classes to prepare for. And then they always made it seem like if one student's not engaged, then it's your fault. So they didn't set us up, I feel like, for success. And many of the professors that I hadn't been in the classroom in years, which I think is a disservice. I think they need to get back in the classroom and see what's going on, and then adjust their teaching and their practices to what's really going on, and setting future teachers up for something realistic, because there's such a huge turnover rate. They're failing students. That is, look at how much money you spend on on a teaching degree, only to leave within 3 to 5 years often.
Right. Yeah. Well, I mean, my wife went to IU Bloomington school education for her study, and most of her professors, they never really taught in a real classroom setting, and most of them don't even have kids. But people who came up with those new ideas and new ways. And the thing is, what bothers me is that they've never tried on any particular school before they just roll out to everyone, right? Just like a common cold. It's just like everybody, it doesn't matter. Everybody trying it. And that caused such a huge confusion.
Yes, well, it's the same thing that I saw, and I also, to piggyback off of that, saw teachers who would teach for 2 or 3 years and then they became administrators. And again, administrators, because they're not in the classroom. I think a good administrator takes the time to cover classes, once a week, once a month, they go in and they cover a classroom so they can actually see
Right,
what's
right,
going on.
right. Yeah,
And they can see the struggles, because at my school, when students got in trouble, oftentimes they would go to the administrator and they would come back 20 minutes later laughing about it, and sometimes with a piece of candy. And that completely undermined the teachers. And it was a huge
yeah,
disruption. Like, that's another thing that really changed in education. We used to hold the kids more accountable. And if a student was being disruptive, they would be removed from the classroom so everyone else could learn.
right,
And that totally changed. And they started pointing the finger, instead of at the student, they started pointing the finger at teachers
right,
and saying it's your fault.
right.
Um, and that not only was very frustrating for the teachers. Again, I have all the empathy in the world for my friends who are teachers, my daughter's teachers,
Mm,
because it is tough.
it is.
Uh, and I sincerely believe most teachers, 98, 99% of teachers, are good people. They are just gluttons for punishment because they care so much.
Yeah,
They would do anything to see a kid be successful. And when kids aren't, they do blame themselves. And
right,
that's hard for teachers to stay in that when you're constantly feel like you're not doing
right.
well.
And yeah, you constantly feel like a failure.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah, everybody needs successes in their job or their
right,
career or their passion to want to continue doing it, and to want to get up and go to work every day.
right. And also, like the administrators actually often set up very unrealistic goals for the teacher.
Yes,
Yeah,
that is true. The goals are often just unattainable.
right.
But I know my friends that were teachers, they spent countless hours trying to do their best. Um, but again, when you have professors who are not being realistic with what to expect. And then you have these educational experts. We had one that we called a bow tie guy, because he had a little bow tie and he had all these things. He was going to, save the world. He was going to fix it all. And, we had to try all these initiatives that often we didn't believe in, but we had to,
Right.
we had to do this. It was just really frustrating.
Right. And also they never take anything from the teachers. They never actually go asking teachers what kind of problem you're facing. What's your way of solving that? How do you
Yes.
never ask that? They
It
always
is the
come from
only profession,
right.
I'm sorry, it's the only profession that I can personally think of where we're professionals, we have degrees, but we're not treated like
No,
professionals.
no,
We're not respected like professionals.
no.
So much is thrown on our desk or thrown at us, and
Mm,
it's not a cooperative relationship.
no. And
And that's unfortunate.
yeah, I know in many cases it's very abusive situation.
It is. I laughed after I got out of teaching. I laughed and I said, "Oh my gosh, did I just have low self-esteem and I was like a glutton for punishment? Because why else would I tolerate
Right.
being treated like that for so many years?" And it's because I really cared about my students and I believed in what I was doing. And that's why those teachers are in the room. It's because they care. There's a bad apple in every profession, but that's rare, I think.
Right. That's rare. I mean, my personal experience also can testify for that. Most teachers really caring and they stay there teaching is because they really care about students.
Yes.
So they take that kind of abuse, but there is so much you can take.
Right. There is. And I think we're in for a huge teacher shortage. I'm surprised I'm surprised we haven't seen more of that yet.
Yeah.
And I know, like, I've heard stories like where I taught, they'd have a teacher who quit after a week. She just walked out in the middle of the afternoon and didn't come back.
Wow.
And so they spent a month trying to find someone to cover their, that classroom. So they had to like take the teachers, like during their prep time, they had to cover it.
Yeah.
And that's a month of those kids not having a teaching expert and having inconsistencies and people just in and out of the classroom. And you can't really learn, in my opinion, that way.
Right.
They're just basically babysitting those students. So yeah, there are many problems in education, I would say. But again, I think what I noticed, rigor was a huge one.
Right.
Um, not actually disciplining students, just trying to make the numbers look good.
Right.
And then the third thing, that I didn't like. We went, when I was in school, and I'm sure when most people were in school, if you didn't turn in a paper, you got a 0.
Right.
You didn't do your homework assignment, you got a 0. They decided about 8 years ago or so at my school system that we should give kids 50% for not turning in any work.
Oh, wow.
So, and my struggle with that is my students who are really struggling, or any struggling student, might turn in a paper and get a 40%, an honest 40%, and have less than a student who did nothing. And so to me, that was like setting students up for, expect welfare in your life. Just expect
Right.
someone to
Yeah.
give you things. Don't work for anything. It's not worth it. You're not,
Right.
just take whatever the government wants to give you, or
Right.
whoever wants to give you something for free. And so that was a struggle I had. And teachers who honestly tried to hold kids accountable with grades, were the ones who got called down to the office.
Oh, yeah. You get in trouble with,
They,
yeah.
exactly. Yeah. They would be in trouble, and they would have to read books. They'd have, extra work. They already have so much work, and they would give them extra work to try to, basically, in my opinion, it was play the game or suffer the consequences. You're either going to give them 50% and you're going to, quote, cook the books. You're going to make it look as good as you can, and you're not going to expect anything of these students, not give them homework, or you're going to have to do extra work until you comply with us.
Right.
So I think it was just passive aggressive pressure that they put on people. It wasn't really about making them better teachers,
No.
better people, because they were doing the honest thing. They didn't leave their integrity at the door. They did everything they could. And then they would send out, at midterms, they would put out all of the teachers. They would say biology teachers, and they would have their failure rates. Well, we could figure out who was, whose failure rates were the highest. So it was not discreet at all. And it wasn't meant to be discreet.
Oh, wow.
It was meant to be like, okay, these people are doing really well. They're better teachers than you because they have only 3% of their students failing, which is completely unrealistic. And
Right.
everyone should be suspect of that. Those should have been the people that they should have been talking to, not the people who maybe had 16% failure rate or something.
Right.
So that was just,
Well,
again, a huge
that's
frustration.
basically just lying to the parents.
It is. And
Just honest.
it is, because parents, we look at many parents, and especially where I taught, if my students had good grades, that's what they equated with success, because that's what we did, when our parents did when we were a kid. Money for getting good grades, or some kind of a reward and a pat on the back or whatever. And so often parents equate good grades, you're successful, you're getting good education, you're doing a great job.
Right.
And what they don't know often is, but what's being expected of your child.
Right.
You don't want your child getting a good grade for being like the best of the class that no one expects anything out of.
Right. Well, I mean, that's the thing. Most parents still, in their mind, school is, when they went to school, it's about 20, 30 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And they project that to what's coming, what happened now. So when they say the kids got A and B, they just assume they learned something.
Yes. Like, here's what I do. When I were a parent, I would put a piece of paper in front of my child and say, write a paragraph about, give them a topic, something they're passionate about, and see what their writing looks like.
Right.
See if they know how to punctuate, if they can capitalize, if they can write incomplete sentences. Because I taught 9th grade, and even the students that were like the honor students where I taught, when I looked at their writing, it was atrocious. I didn't even know where to start to help some of them
Right.
without just going, just give me the paper and let me erase it and I'll rewrite it for you, because what the heck else can I do with this? It was just so bad.
Right.
In their English final in ninth grade, they had to determine which two, like TO, TOO, or TWO. That was part of their final. There, and there. That's something that should have been in a fourth or fifth grade
Right.
exam, not a ninth grade exam. And when we read, for instance, To Kill a Mockingbird, I was told so many times by so many English teachers, they're just not going to read it. So we're just going to let them watch the movie and then we'll like read little clips of it. Like, you have to make them read, or we would read to them. We didn't expect them
Right.
to
Right.
read in class,
Mm.
which there's a skill in reading and hearing it and following along. But we didn't even expect them to read it on their own, which was just I miss parts of teaching, but I don't miss those kinds of things.
Well, yeah.
And I always felt I really
Yeah.
hated it when we had parent teacher conferences and the parents were so proud of their kids because they had these good grades. And I thought sometimes I think everybody's getting an A in this class or
Right.
whatever. It's just you have to ask the questions, what are you learning? Let me see what you're doing in class.
Yeah.
You know,
Well, there's thing like when I was teaching, I teach at a private college prep
mhm.
school, and so every year, I mean, we give awards to students, right? AB honor rolls and
Yes.
A's. When you got AB honors, almost the whole class went up, right?
We
And,
I know.
and the thing is, the parents are okay with it. Somehow
Mhm.
never came to their, well, I think they are kind of trusting us, trusting the school, trusting teachers. But when you see something like that, you should say, oh, something's wrong here.
Exactly. When the kids are sitting in the bleachers and 3/4 of the kids come up and they're on the AB honor roll,
Right.
there's something wrong with that. Yes, but it goes back, in my opinion. All these things sort of happened at the same time in sports, where everybody gets a trophy,
Right.
where everybody gets to be a cheerleader in
Right.
high school. You don't
Right.
say no. Some kids don't get to do these things.
Right.
It's okay. Our kids can handle rejection, but I think we didn't trust them enough. I feel like everything that was done, at least from a parent level or a teacher level, it was done thinking we were doing the best thing. We were really helping these kids out. We're giving them a leg up in life. But I think that we've damaged their self-esteem and given them so much that they don't know how to work for anything now.
Right. Right. Yeah.
Often.
Yeah. Basically, they won't be able to fend for themselves in the real world.
Mhm. Yes, and I even worry about that with my 15-year-old. We went to Auburn College a couple of days ago and did a tour, and I thought, oh my gosh, she has so much to learn for her to be independent.
Mhm.
Because I'm a teacher, but I'm guilty of sheltering her a little bit. So you know, so much of what we've done has been out of love. I don't think on the level that I'm discussing with teachers and with parents, it wasn't nefarious.
Right.
But it's still been damaging, I
Right.
think.
Yeah.
You
I
know, with,
think
with
yeah, I think uh, most teachers really care about students, are trying to do the best, but the policy is made from the top. I truly believe there is a agenda behind it.
Mhm.
Really disable our kids.
I agree. I don't know how we can continue to push out the best and the brightest with these low
Right.
expectations. I think when kids are given things that they haven't worked for, I think that creates ambivalence and laziness. That's not productive for our society.
Right.
And I think when, kind of the everybody gets a trophy world we live in, um, again, you expect something for nothing and you have an inflated sense of self. And I don't think any of those things are positive things. That's nothing I would want for my daughter.
Well, here is the agenda behind that is when those people graduate, they won't be able to succeed in the real world, and then you have those people, those critical race theorists, those neo-Marxists, will tell them that's the fault of society, you're the victims, so therefore you need to do something.
Yes.
The resentment, the bitterness, they actually want to use that energy to cause chaos.
Yes, and looking back, it's not something I recognized while it was happening. I remember though telling my mom and my dad, the first year I taught, we're gonna lose the middle class. And they're like, what are you talking about, Cory? You know, I was 22 years old. And I said, my students are going one of two ways. Their parents either value education and they want them to go to college or have a skill. I don't think you have to go to college, but you have to have a skill.
Right.
Or they don't care at all about that, and they kind of scoff at me as a teacher, and so we're splitting. You know, I felt like the middle class was going to dissolve and we were going to have a two-class system. I saw that. I didn't see all these other things until a couple of years ago, exactly what you're saying, where, you know, and I think it's a system that has been created.
Right.
It has been, there's an architect or several architects of this system. And they're so entrenched in it. And it is frightening to me as I look at it now.
Right. Yeah. I didn't realize that until last summer. So
I think so many of us woke up.
Right.
You know, with COVID and everything. I think with parents having their kids at home and going, what the heck are you learning? What is that? And I think that for me personally, I think that COVID has been a terrible thing, but I feel like God makes good things out of everything. Right. And we have woken up and we see now more clearly critical race theory. We see, because, you know, I had to read all those books. We had book studies and things in school. And so I read every book about critical race theory and stuff. And, you know, it's put out in such an innocent and gentle way, and that we're doing it for these, you know, these kids and things. Yeah. So like you, I woke up about a year and a half ago.
Oh, wow.
Way ahead of me. Yeah. So I think that you and we have this similar story, that so many people started questioning, going, wait a minute, it's like a roadmap that we can look back on and see that this has been orchestrated.
Right. Yeah. Last summer. Well, first of all, I spent a week to read Abraham Kennedy's How to Be an Anti-Racist.
Yes.
That book is very clear. That's communist propaganda, talking about destroy capitalism, you know, talking about set up a department of anti-racist, which is basically a secret police. Is really, you know, watch over all the federal and local officials, even watch how they think. And then from there, I spend time study critical race theory, and from that I get back to you know, the critical race theory, the Frankfurt School, and also all the way back to Antonio Gramsci, who is the father of Cultural Revolution. So I don't know if you know about him.
No, I'm not familiar with him.
Okay, so basically, he was an Italian communist, a leader of Italian Communist Party, and he was put in prison by Mussolini. And so in the prison, he had time to think and to write. So he actually did kind of soul searching and say what went wrong, why communists didn't work.
So he's like communism 2.0 while he's in prison.
Right. So basically he said, well, he looked at based on the Marxism, then the communists should start in highly developed capitalist country, right? Should start in Germany, should start in France or England or USA, but he actually succeeded in Russia. So he was thinking, what's going on here? And so he realized that the reason the communist was not successful is because all those cultural institutions. So he listed 5. family, church, education, media, and law. He was
Okay.
those prevent communist happen.
Mm-hmm.
The way for the communists to succeed is to infiltrate and co-opt those institutions. So
Mm-hmm.
later on, it was called the Long March through institutions.
Okay.
So he kind of laid out the blueprint, and then it will get picked up by the Frankfurt School, which are basically a bunch of communists. And so they started this. So the school of Frankfurt School, when Hitler came to power, they got pushed out, and they actually went to a lot of them went to Columbia University and become professors there. And so that group picked up from Antonio Gramsci about cultural Marxism, but they also reflected about the classic Marxism, which basically is between workers and the bourgeois,
Mm-hmm. Yes.
workers and the have-nots versus the haves.
Right. The workers of the bourgeoisie. Yes.
Right. And he noticed that, well, that didn't happen because capitalism was so successful that most of the workers became middle class. So most of the workers become bourgeois. So they lost. So he was thinking we need to have somebody else. We cannot count on workers. And that's where they started notice they called ghetto population people in the inner cities and all that. So that's how they made that shift and put into race, then put not only race, but also gender. And so anything they can, cause conflict in a society.
Yes.
They are basically, they call it, they are trying to unite those so-called marginalized people and make that into, the new new workers for the communists. Wow. So that from there came up, critical race theory. So race become such a weapon that they are using. So and but in terms of education, that's because we had the critical race theory, but in education, I think in 1995, there's a book called The Critical Pedagogy.
Yes.
And that actually basically, the author made that clear that just the application of critical race theory in the field of education.
I read that book years. Okay. Yes, I read that book. It's been some time, but that was one of the books, recommended reading books that I had to read at school.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So what do you what do you felt at that time? That book.
Gosh, that was some time ago. But again, it was just a lot of white guilt. Right. I think for me, and that no matter what and I think that is maybe where we started expecting a lot less of my minority students, because we had to we owed it to them. Right. And to me, hustling a poor person or hustling like one of my students that was of color or something, like that's a sin in my book. Right. But that's when we started expecting less, I feel like. And again, there was just a lot of white guilt. But I looked around and I thought 98% of the teachers in this building are white. I drive by 3 school districts every day that I could teach, and that would be a lot easier. But I come here because I like this population of students.
So what's in your student population? What kind of racial makeup?
When I started out, it was a working class school system. So a lot of blue collar workers, probably 70% white, 30% black, maybe 60-40, somewhere around there. Okay. And then I saw it significantly change to like white students, maybe 30%, black students, 30-40%, and lots of Hispanic students were moving in there.
Right. Okay.
And Yeah, I probably better not
Yeah.
say any
Well,
more about.
then that actually put teachers in a very bad spot, just because, just because you are white. So no
It was,
matter what you do, you are wrong.
yes, exactly. And I had a good relationship with my students, because I would just laugh and just
Uh,
I was pretty transparent about me being white and them being black or whatever, and
right,
that but my litmus test was I treated them the way I would want someone to treat my daughter if
right,
she were in their shoes.
yeah,
And I would never say anything to them or talk to them in a way that I wouldn't talk to my own child.
right.
So that's how I went about my teaching. And because of that, I had a good relationship, except my last year teaching. I was put on a different team, and the students were much rougher on that team.
Mm,
And I knew sometimes that if I crossed one of the Hispanic students, for instance, they were all going to get together and like they could turn on me very quickly.
oh,
And that was the first year I really noticed that um that many of them, like the kids on that team, they wouldn't stand for our Pledge of Allegiance. They were flat out told me, we didn't come here to be part of your culture. We came here for jobs, and we were only standing for the Mexican flag and things. So there was a lot of, and that was the first time I really noticed that. And looking at it now, everything that's happened with,
mm,
the divisiveness, white
right,
versus everything else. I see, like, kind of again the groundwork for some of that.
right. Wow.
And just the frustrations that I had, and I could, yeah, just my school never really had everyone was kind of the same socioeconomics. There wasn't a lot of bullying
Right,
when I started there, and our black students and white students, they got along really well because they lived in the same neighborhoods.
right.
And then my last few years, it became more like some got along, but then there was some more like, this is my group and you can't be part of my group kind of thing.
Okay.
And so again, I just, you start piecing together and connecting dots and thinking, this all part of a greater plan.
Yeah, it is. It is. I
Hmm.
think the dots are
Yeah. And I'm sure I
pretty much
still have
connected.
so much more to figure out with it. I
Right.
know you're light years ahead of me from your experiences, but I'm still sort of connecting dots and things with it.
Yeah. Well, have you um, went through restorative justice, that kind of training?
Yes, yes, I did. Now it's been probably 5 years
Uh-huh.
with that. So
It's about
like yeah, so you're gonna have to lead the discussion on that, and then I can just interject if you
okay.
don't mind,
Well,
because
we had this training when I was teaching at this is a Christian private college
mhm,
school, and we have this one from our one of the board members. Mm, uh, she's also a parent, and but she never, doesn't have really never taught in our school and really doesn't have a teaching experience. So, but
mhm,
kind of train them how to use restorative justice. Is basically you're trying to talk things out. You
mhm,
get the let's say someone bullies someone. So you want the kids who's bullying the other people, put them together and work things out.
mhm.
And that basically cause a problem later on, is that we're not talking about punishing the people who actually, bullying students.
That did the bullying.
Yeah, we are actually trying to kind of, uh, in a way, trying to educate them and turn them around, but
Mhm.
not through punishment, but through some kind of, restorative kind of process.
Yes.
And that
That
became,
was,
yeah,
oh,
go
sorry,
ahead.
go ahead. No, no, please go ahead.
Because in the past, we know if someone did something wrong, you'll be punished, right? There
Mhm.
is thing like that. But I think nowadays, the people who causing troubles, they they are emboldened because they can get away with it.
I totally agree with that. And
Uh,
that's something I saw in education where I taught all the time. Like I said, students would go down to the administrator. Well, first, before we could send them to an administrator, we had to send them across the room to like another, like a teacher buddy. So students disrupting my class, I have to send them across the room to disrupt that class to prove that it's not just me, that I'm a bad teacher, for
oh,
instance.
wow.
Then they could go down to the office, but they would have so many kids down there that they would send them back a few minutes later after they had, talked through whatever problem, even if they were, bullying a student or saying, cursing or whatever. So there wasn't, we didn't do restorative justice as much. Sometimes our counselors did that. Like they would pull kids together and try to, conflict mediation
Yeah,
and
yeah,
things like
yeah.
that.
Mm.
So we didn't have that as much, but it was a lot more. The administrators would talk to them and then shoot them back to class. And
Oh,
then they would disrupt the next class because maybe that child, their parent was arrested the night before, someone OD'd in the family. That happened all the time at my school.
oh,
So
wow.
these kids had significant problems
Okay.
sometimes, and sometimes they just were not nice, they just were bullies or whatever.
Right.
But these kids, no matter their background, they still have to function in society.
Exactly.
And so we can't make excuses for them, and we can't. And I would tell my students, if you've had a bad day, if you've been up all night, if you were in the hospital last night, whatever the issue is, if you have an anniversary of someone you love that's passed away, if you let someone know, hey, I may be a little bit edgy, or I may be tired today,
Mm.
we can tell people, you can tell teachers, people will
Right,
give you a day pass.
right,
You have to communicate though,
right,
but you can't just be a jerk
right.
for the rest of your life and expect everybody. The world's not going to bend for these people.
No, no.
Although it seems like sometimes it is in these like subgroups that we've seen lately, but in theory, that's not how life is supposed to work.
Yeah. Well,
We have to go down.
that's where now a lot of employers uh, see this kind of problems. People
Mhm.
show up and they expect to get paid, and you have to tell them what to do.
Yes.
And sometimes people don't even show up. I don't even tell you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm just amazed at how much things have changed and how quickly they have changed. Being a consumer, being a teacher, being a parent,
Mm.
it just seems like in the last 5 years, things have changed so radically and drastically. I just, my family were like, what has happened? Like, how did it happen that quickly? Or were we asleep and we didn't notice these subtle changes?
Well, as a teacher, I think I think you are right. I mean, uh, it's about at first it's kind of gradual, but in the past like 5 and 7 years, that just kind of accelerated.
Hmm.
Unbelievable.
Yes.
Yeah, there's a huge difference. Uh, yeah, and it's and the I think a teacher really got the short end of it.
I would agree. I would agree with that. I think
Yeah,
again, that's why I think a lot of teachers are. I don't see a lot of young people staying in education.
no,
The pay is not good.
no,
Who wants to be treated poorly every day?
right.
People like myself, if I hadn't had a health problem, but if I had taught, I would be stuck. Basically, I would have to do it because
Mm,
at 55 is when I could retire, and so
okay,
I would have a few more years. And
right,
so I have friends like that they count down
right, right,
when they can retire. They still love their students. They still buy them things, take care of them when they need it, do all kinds of things out of their own pocket for these kids because they care,
right,
but they're just tired.
right. Well, on the other hand, it become if we just give up, if we just like don't care, then you may be you may be uh okay, right? And
Uh-huh.
if you just play the game, then you're fine.
Yes. And I've seen some teachers do that too,
Right.
where they have checked out somewhat, um, and they're just, getting a check and they're doing the curriculum, but they're not maybe teaching. And when I taught with my students, I was up in front of the classroom bouncing around doing everything I could to get their attention, to tease them, to engage them. And I've been in classrooms where the teachers sit in the back of the room and they get papers and things like that. And so yeah, I've seen a little bit of that. Fortunately, I haven't seen a lot of that, and I just hope and pray that doesn't become the norm for students, because kids deserve better. But I would encourage parents, if you have the luxury of volunteering, volunteer in the school or the classroom so you can see what's going on. Talk to other parents in the classroom, ask to see your kids work. If they're doing social emotional learning, ask to see the curriculum. I have a friend who went through the entire curriculum, kindergarten through the years, and looked at everything to see what would I not want my student learning. So I think parents, I doubt many parents, including myself, I haven't looked at standards in a while. See what the 9th grade standards are, 7th grade, kindergarten standards, what's being taught.
Well, the thing is, this I mean, as long as math is concerned, you probably don't see that. I mean, you still look good on paper, but the thing is, the kids never really learned. I mean, they probably went through that, but they never understand it, and because the grades are so inflated, they can get away with it. And then as a teacher, like say if you are in 9th grade, and the problem get accumulated. So once the people get to you, they are so behind. And
so we would just give them a calculator, because we can't do a lot of these things. So it's, here's a calculator, get on the train and we're going. But at my school, everyone in 9th grade had to take algebra. There were students that shouldn't have been in algebra class. I had students that were mildly mentally handicapped with IQs of 55 to 70 who had to sit, their parents either had to say, I want my child off the diploma track, or they had to take algebra. And that's not okay. Not everyone is ready for algebra in 9th grade.
Well, especially, I mean, a lot of them are still struggling with times table.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. Well, they just basically told us, at this point, if they don't know it, you need to just give up on it. Don't worry about it. And so I would watch these kids move their fingers underneath the desk and stuff, or we'd say like, for division, they learned this touch math too. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but with addition. So maybe 3 plus 4, like they touch the number 3 times, and then 4 has 4 points they touch. So they'll go 3 and then 4, 5, 6, 7 to touch it, instead of just memorizing. Like memorization became like a bad word. So they do this touch math, and they can do it with subtraction too. And I would watch these kids and I'm like, what the heck are you doing? Do you have like some kind of a sensory issue or what? And it was this touch math, this weird touch math thing that, again, it's dumbing down. It is watering down education.
Yeah, definitely. Wow. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm sure we'll talk more, because we're still, I mean, in a way, we're still just, there's still a lot we can talk about it. But well, thank you so much.
I hope one day we're talking about how it's getting better, how things are improving and they're going in there. I hope we have that conversation one day.
Yeah, but definitely. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.